The conference room doors exploded open. Jack Morrison stormed through, his worn janitor's uniform stark against polished marble and designer suits. 40 shareholders froze as this man charged toward Veronica Sterling. 28 years old in tailored Armani, her pen hovering above the contract worth $4.2 billion. He didn't hesitate. His calloused hand seized the document. His voice cut through shocked silence. "You don't know what you're signing." Security rushed forward, but he was louder. "This thing has killed people before. And your father was the one who started it." The room fell silent. Veronica stood frozen, anger flashing in her eyes, but beneath it, terror. Jack tore the contract in half, then quarters, then confetti, scattering like snow. The cameras captured everything. The truth began to bleed. 10 years earlier, Jack Morrison had been different. At 26, he was Axiom Capital's rising star, the youngest strategic auditor ever appointed to Richard Sterling's inner circle. Richard had found him working 2 jobs to finish his graduate degree, exhausted and brilliant, hunched over spreadsheets at 3 in the morning. Within a week, Jack had an office on the 47th floor and a salary that made his mother cry. Richard Sterling became more than a boss. He was the father Jack never had, the mentor who believed in him, the man who pulled him from poverty and gave him purpose. Jack would have done anything for Richard. For 3 years, he did exactly that, reorganizing Axiom's entire audit infrastructure, creating algorithms that saved millions, working 100-hour weeks, because he believed in Richard's mission, bringing ethical investment to medical innovation, funding cures that could save lives. But belief crumbles when it collides with evidence. It started with a discrepancy during routine quarterly review. Wire transfers flowing through subsidiaries that didn't match approved project codes, hundreds of millions moving through shell companies. Jack spent 3 weeks tracing the money, working alone after cleaning crews finished, following digital breadcrumbs until he found it. Project Helix. The name appeared in encrypted files buried in legacy servers. Jack had helped design those servers, knew their architecture. What he uncovered made his blood freeze. Project Helix wasn't just money laundering. It was funding for pharmaceutical trials rejected by every ethics board. Experimental drugs tested on vulnerable populations without proper consent. Results falsified to secure approval. And authorizing every transfer was Richard Sterling's signature. Jack didn't want to believe it. He spent another week searching for explanations. But the evidence was undeniable. So he did what he thought was right. He scheduled a private meeting with Richard and laid out everything. Richard listened, without interrupting. When Jack finished, there was long silence. Then, Richard smiled, sad and knowing. "You're a good man, Jack. That's why I hired you. But good men don't understand how the world actually works," Richard explained calmly. The trials were necessary evils, shortcuts that would eventually save more lives than they cost. The money laundering was creative accounting to bypass bureaucratic obstacles. Everything served a greater good that someone young couldn't comprehend. Jack refused to accept it. He threatened to go to authorities, to the press. Richard's expression hardened. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" Within 48 hours, Jack's world disintegrated. Anonymous tips reached the SEC, alleging embezzlement. Evidence appeared on his computer. Transactions he'd never made. His protests drowned in manufactured proof. He was fired, blacklisted, banned from finance forever. His wife Sarah tried to stand by him through the investigation. The humiliation. The months when they couldn't afford rent. But stress destroyed her fragile health. And when their daughter Ella was only 3, Sarah's heart condition claimed her life. Jack held her hand in the hospital and made a promise. He wouldn't seek revenge. He would wait for truth to reveal itself, and he would make sure Ella grew up knowing that integrity mattered more than wealth. That silence in the face of evil was its own form of evil. That her father had done the right thing, even when it cost him everything. A decade passed. Jack Morrison became invisible. 3 nights weekly, he wore the Navy uniform and cleaned floors in the same building where he'd once commanded respect. The night shift suited him solitude broken only by vacuum cleaners and his mop across tile. He worked 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Then went home to the small apartment he shared with Ella. Now 13 with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn justice. Their life was simple. Ella attended public school and knew how to stretch dollars. She never complained about secondhand clothes or their ancient television. Jack had taught her that wealth and worth weren't the same. Every morning when he returned, she'd be awake making toast, asking about his night. On the other side of that building, in the penthouse occupying the entire 63rd floor, Veronica Sterling was building her empire. She'd returned from Wharton with perfect grades and a reputation for ruthless brilliance. When her father died 2 years earlier, a sudden heart attack, some whispered wasn't natural. She'd inherited Axiom at 26. The board expected a figurehead. They learned quickly how wrong they were. Veronica restructured everything her first year, firing anyone whose loyalty she questioned, transforming Axiom from traditional investment firm into global restructuring powerhouse. She was brilliant, driven, convinced she was restoring honor to her father's name. Richard Sterling had been her hero. She'd been studying abroad when Jack Morrison's scandal broke, had only heard her father's version, never questioned the narrative painting Jack as a greedy traitor. Now she stood before floor-to-ceiling windows each morning, surveying the city she intended to conquer. Her assistant arrived at 7 precisely with the day's schedule. She slept 4 hours nightly, dated occasionally but never seriously, had no friends unconnected to business. Her life was her work. The global restructure contract with Syngenta Pharmaceuticals was supposed to be her masterpiece. $4.2 billion to reorganize Zygenta's entire operational structure. 8 months of negotiations. The business press was already writing glowing profiles. She'd scheduled the signing for maximum impact. What she didn't know was that 3 floors below, Jack Morrison had been watching. Jack still had access. The network architecture he'd designed had never been fully replaced, and he'd kept the master backdoor allowing him to monitor financial movements. Most nights after cleaning the executive wing, he'd sit in empty conference rooms with a laptop rebuilt from discarded parts and watch numbers flow. He told himself he was keeping watch, but he was waiting for exactly what eventually appeared. The first time Jack saw the code, he almost dismissed it as coincidence. Buried in a routine transfer was a character string most people wouldn't notice. But Jack had memorized every aspect of Project Helix, and he recognized the pattern instantly. VSHLX91. The prefix was new, but the HLX designation and sequence were identical to accounts used for Helix 10 years ago. He pulled up associated transactions and felt his stomach drop. The amounts were staggering, all flowing towards Syngenta Pharmaceuticals. Jack spent the next 72 hours barely sleeping, cross-referencing every data point. He traced Zygenta's corporate history and found what he'd feared. 5 years ago, the company had been called Helixgen Industries. They'd rebranded after lawsuits alleging unsafe drug trials in East Africa. But core ownership remained identical. This wasn't legitimate restructuring. It was Project Helix rising from the grave. $4.2 billion wasn't investment capital, it was the opening payment in a scheme dwarfing what Richard Sterling had done before. And Veronica had no idea she was about to legitimize a machine designed to kill people for profit. Jack tried proper channels first. He typed an anonymous letter and sent it to the SEC. He created a throwaway email and sent breakdowns to 3 journalists. He called Axiom's ethics hotline. Nothing happened. The signing ceremony remained scheduled, remained inevitable. Jack realized the system he'd once believed in wasn't going to save anyone. The board at Axiom knew exactly what they were doing. These were the same men who'd served under Richard, who'd orchestrated Jack's destruction. They were using Veronica, exploiting her trust in her father's legacy, turning her into the face of their renewed operation. Jack stood in his apartment 4 nights before the signing, staring at evidence compiled on his laptop. Ella slept in the next room. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, but this wasn't revenge. This was preventing the same atrocities from happening again. He couldn't send Ella to school the next morning. Instead, he sat her down and told her everything, not the sanitized version, but truth. Ella listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. "What's the right thing to do, Dad?" Jack smiled despite the weight crushing his chest. She stood, hugged him fiercely. "You already know. You've always known. You're just scared." She was right. He was terrified. But fear had never been good enough reason to do nothing. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock Thursday morning. Jack knew the layout intimately. He knew which door caterers would use, knew security protocols, knew exactly where Veronica would stand. He didn't bother with stealth. At 9:57, wearing his janitor uniform, Jack Morrison walked directly to the private elevator, serving the executive suite. The security guard recognized him from night shift. He waved him through. Jack rode up alone, heart hammering. The elevator moved in slow motion, each floor chiming like a countdown. He had no plan beyond the next 5 minutes. No escape route. All he had was truth, and hope that truth still mattered. The doors opened directly into the conference room's antechamber. Through glass walls, he could see the ceremony in progress. 40 people in expensive suits around the table, cameras positioned to capture every angle. And at the head of it all, Veronica Sterling in dove gray, looking like power incarnate. The contract sat before her, leather-bound and official, beside a fountain pen that had belonged to her father. Jack didn't give himself time to think. He pushed through glass doors hard enough, they bounced off their stops, and suddenly every eye was on him. Talking stopped. Camera operators swiveled. Veronica's head snapped up. Jack crossed to the table in 4 long strides. His hand shot out and grabbed the contract, lifting it high like evidence. His voice came out stronger than expected. "You don't know what you're signing." 2 security guards appeared. But Jack was already talking. "This isn't a restructuring contract. It's a front for Project Helix, the same operation that funded illegal drug trials 10 years ago. The same operation your father built. The same operation that killed people." Veronica stood frozen, lips parted. Someone shouted for security. But Jack kept talking, words tumbling faster. "This thing has killed people before. And your father, Richard Sterling, your father was the one who started it." The room erupted. Executives shouted contradicting orders. Cameras swiveled between Jack and Veronica, capturing her expression as it shifted from anger to confusion to recognition. For one moment, their eyes met, and Jack saw her truly see him. Not a janitor, but a human being desperately trying to save her. Then he tore the contract. The sound of ripping paper cut through shouting. He tore it again, and again, shredding the $4.2 billion agreement into confetti scattering across marble. Security guards slammed him against the wall, hands rough, already pulling his arms behind his back. But Jack wasn't done. He turned his head to keep Veronica in sight and shouted his final warning. "You're finishing the crime your father started. Wake up." They dragged him toward the elevator. The last thing he saw was Veronica standing motionless, the fountain pen still in her hand, trembling so violently she had to set it down. Her face had gone pale, sweat gleaming at her temples. She looked like someone who'd just glimpsed an abyss. Veronica dismissed everyone from the conference room. Shareholders filed out in confused silence. Media representatives were escorted away, and within 10 minutes, she stood alone surrounded by shredded remains of her deal. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table and tried to breathe. But the room felt like it was tilting. Project Helix. The name reverberated in her skull. She'd never heard it before, but something about the way that Janitor had said it made her chest tighten. Veronica prided herself on never acting on emotion, on always letting data guide decisions. So she pulled her laptop and began searching Axiom's internal databases. At first, nothing. Older files were archived in systems requiring administrative clearance. But Veronica was CEO. 90 minutes of searching before she found the first reference. A budget allocation from 12 years ago, approved by her father, with notation VSHLX91. Her blood went cold. VS were her initials. Her father had tagged certain accounts with her initials since she was a teenager. She expanded the search. Results appeared slowly, pulled from archives not accessed in years. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Financial transfers moving through subsidiary accounts, all bearing HLX variations, all authorized by Richard Sterling between 10 and 15 years ago. Amounts totaling over $1 billion, moving through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore. Her mouth went dry. She tried telling herself there was innocent explanation. But she couldn't stop seeing that janitor's face. The absolute conviction in his eyes. Veronica pulled up the Zygena contract and started cross-referencing account numbers. Her stomach lurched when she found matches. 3 subsidiary accounts in the new contract used exact registration codes as accounts from old HLX transactions, too specific to be coincidence. She thought about calling Alan Reeves, her chief financial officer, the man who'd served as her father's right hand for 20 years. But something stopped her. Alan had been unusually insistent about this deal, had pushed hard for quick signing. What if he knew? What if they all knew? Veronica stood abruptly and walked to the windows. 63 floors below. The city moved like an oblivious organism. She'd built her identity on being Richard Sterling's daughter, on continuing his legacy. But what if the foundation was rotten? What if her father wasn't the hero she'd always believed? The thought made her physically ill. She pressed her forehead against cool glass. When she opened her eyes again, she'd made a decision. She needed to know the truth, whatever it cost, and the only person who seemed to have answers was currently being held in a security office. Veronica straightened her jacket, wiped emotion from her face, and walked out with cold purpose. She rode the elevator down to security and walked past the front desk without acknowledging the guard. Through the observation window, she could see him, the janitor who'd destroyed her deal, sitting calmly with hands folded, looking like a man who'd already accepted whatever consequences were coming. She dismissed security personnel and entered the room alone. Jack looked up as she closed the door, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Up close, Veronica noticed details she'd missed. He was probably mid-30s but looked older, with lines around his eyes. His janitor uniform was clean but worn thin. His hands were calloused, but his eyes were what held her attention, dark and steady, and filled with something like pity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I didn't think you'd come." Veronica pulled out the chair and sat with perfect posture. "Project Helix," she said flatly. "Tell me what it is." Jack studied her face, and she had the unsettling sense he could see straight through her composure to the terror underneath. "Are you sure you want to know?" She leaned forward. "I don't need saving. I need the truth." Something shifted in his expression, an acknowledgement of respect between equals. For the first time since becoming CEO, Veronica felt like someone was looking at her as a human being rather than a position. "Then we should start at the beginning," Jack said. 10 years ago, I worked for your father." Veronica gave him 48 hours. It was reckless, but something in her gut insisted this man was telling the truth. She used her CEO authority to have trespassing charges dropped, then arranged for Jack to have temporary access to sub-basement levels where Axiom's oldest digital archives were stored. Technology down there was ancient, servers from the 2000s the company had never bothered to decommission. Jack led her through corridors she'd never known existed, past rooms filled with humming machines covered in dust. He moved with confidence of someone who'd helped design this infrastructure. Veronica followed in silence, her Louboutin clicking against concrete. He stopped at a terminal in a room that felt like a tomb, powered it up, and began navigating nested folders. "Your father was brilliant," Jack said as he worked. "I want you to know that." He genuinely believed he was going to change the world. But somewhere along the way, the mission became more important than the methods. The screen filled with documents, financial transfers, research protocols, internal memos. Jack clicked on a video file, and suddenly Richard Sterling appeared. 10 years younger but unmistakably her father. The video was dated March 15, 2014. She watched as her father calmly reviewed a budget proposal for experimental drug trials in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. The language was clinical, almost boring, until you understood what was actually being described: trials conducted without proper oversight, informed consent existing only on paper, adverse event reporting deliberately suppressed. Her father signed off on everything with calm efficiency. Veronica's legs went weak. She grabbed the desk edge, unable to look away as video after video played out. Her father authorizing payments to shell companies. Her father discussing how to structure trials to minimize regulatory exposure. Her father, her hero, calmly ordering actions that had led to people's deaths. "No," she whispered. But the word had no power. Jack paused the video and turned to face her. His expression held no satisfaction, just deep sadness. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to have your faith in someone destroyed." Veronica couldn't breathe. She pressed her hand against her chest. "He was my father," she managed to say, voice breaking. Jack stood and moved toward her, but stopped a careful distance away. "He was a genius blinded by his own certainty," Jack said. "He convinced himself the ends justified the means. He was wrong, but I don't think he was evil. Just human, and fallible, and corrupted by power." Tears were streaming down Veronica's face now. Everything she'd built her life on was crumbling. Every decision she'd made as CEO, every time she'd invoked her father's name, all of it built on a foundation of lies and death. "I idolized him," she whispered. "Everything I've done has been to honor him." Jack's voice remained gentle. "Then honor him by being better than he was, by seeing what he was too proud to see, by stopping what he started before it kills more people." Veronica looked up at him through tears. This man her father had destroyed, who had every reason to hate her, and instead was offering redemption. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're not him," Jack interrupted. "And because you still have a chance to make a choice he never did. You can stop this, Veronica, but only if you're willing to tear down everything you've built." She thought about the company, about her reputation, about the life she'd constructed. Then she thought about people who would die if the Exigena contract moved forward. The choice wasn't as hard as it should have been. "Tell me what we need to do," she said. Jack's apartment was nothing like spaces Veronica usually inhabited. The building was in a neighborhood she'd driven through, but never seen. The elevator was out of order, so they climbed 4 flights of stairs smelling of cooking spices. The apartment was small living room, kitchen, presumably bedroom and bathroom beyond closed doors, but it was meticulously clean and organized. A small table by the window served as both dining area and workspace. Furniture was old but well maintained, books everywhere. And photos. So many photos. Sarah's face smiled from frames on every surface. Veronica was still taking it in when one of the doors opened and a girl emerged. 13 or 14 with dark hair and her father's serious eyes. "Ella," Jack said, his voice gentler than Veronica had heard before. "This is Miss Sterling. She's going to be working with me for a little while." Ella studied Veronica with frank assessment. "You're the one from TV," she said. "The CEO lady who was going to sign that big contract." Veronica felt suddenly aware of how she must look in this space, her designer suit worth more than a month's rent here. "I was," she said carefully. "Your father stopped me." Ella glanced at Jack, then back to Veronica. "Good," she said simply. "Are you hungry?" "We have spaghetti." The dinner was the strangest meal Veronica had eaten in her life. They sat around the small table and ate pasta with marinara from a jar, while Ella asked pointed questions about what Veronica did as CEO, and whether it was hard to walk in heels that high. Jack mostly listened, occasionally redirecting when questions crossed into territory too personal. But Veronica found herself answering honestly. There was something disarming about this girl, who'd grown up with so little but seemed utterly content. After Ella excused herself to do homework, Veronica helped Jack clear dishes and found herself standing at the sink beside this man who'd upended her world. On the wall above the kitchen counter, she noticed a framed photograph. It showed 2 men standing in what looked like a laboratory, both wearing visitor badges and smiling. One was Jack, younger and wearing a suit that fit properly. The other was her father. They looked happy. They looked like friends. Veronica's hand trembled as she set down the plate. "When was that taken?" Jack followed her gaze. 2013, the year Axiom partnered with Memorial Sloan Kettering on legitimate cancer research. Your father flew us to the facility to see where funding was going. It was one of the best days of my life." He paused. "He could have been great, Veronica. The potential was there. But power corrupts even the most well-intentioned people." She stared at the photo. "I'm just like him," she whispered. "Aren't I? Arrogant. Convinced I'm always right. Willing to do whatever it takes to win." Jack was quiet before answering. "You could have been. But you're standing in my kitchen washing dishes and questioning your choices. Your father never did that. He died believing he was justified in everything." Veronica turned to face him. "How do you not hate me? How can you even stand to be in the same room with me?" After what my family did to you. Jack's expression was complicated. Layers of old pain and newer hope mixing. Because hate is exhausting, he said simply. And because you're not your father. You're someone who still has a choice about who you're going to be. Something cracked open in Veronica's chest, some carefully constructed wall between herself and genuine human connection. She'd spent so long being the CEO, being the sterling heir, that she'd forgotten how to be just a person. And this man, who should have been her enemy, was showing her more compassion than she'd shown anyone in years. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. I don't know how to make it right, Jack smiled. That's the first honest thing I've heard you say, he told her. And it's exactly where we need to start. They spent 3 days building their case. Jack taught her how to navigate old archive systems, how to cross-reference financial data, how to see patterns revealing truth. Veronica brought her expertise, her understanding of current Axiom operations, her knowledge of who on the board could be trusted, her access to resources Jack had lost. They worked well together. Slowly, methodically, they built a complete picture of how Project Helix had worked, how it had been buried, and how it was being resurrected through Zegina. The evidence was damning. Video footage of Richard Sterling authorizing illegal trials. Financial records showing money flowing to shell companies. Medical reports documenting adverse events deliberately hidden. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to make it public, in a way that couldn't be suppressed. Jack proposed using the quarterly shareholder meeting, already scheduled to be broadcast live globally. Veronica had authority to control the agenda. If they could get evidence into that broadcast, it would reach thousands simultaneously. The auditorium was packed. Over 200 shareholders filled seats, with another 1,000 connected via video link. News cameras lined the back wall. Veronica stood backstage in the same dove-gray suit. Her hands were steady now. What they wouldn't see until too late was Jack Morrison in the technical control room. His janitor uniform was perfect camouflage. The meeting began precisely on time. Veronica walked onto stage to polite applause and launched into prepared opening remarks. She covered Axiom's quarterly performance. She was smooth, professional, commanding. Alan Reeves sat in the front row, nodding along, completely unsuspecting. 15 minutes in, Veronica reached the portion where she was supposed to announce pharmaceutical partnerships. Instead, she paused and went completely off script. Before I continue, she said, I need to share something I recently discovered about this company's history, and about my father's legacy. A murmur went through the audience. Most of you know that 10 years ago, Axiom weathered a scandal involving an employee accused of financial misconduct. His name was Jack Morrison. The murmur grew louder. What I didn't know until this week was that Jack Morrison never committed those crimes. He was framed by my father and members of this board to cover up an illegal operation called Project Helix. The screen flickered to life, showing Richard Sterling's face from archived video. Veronica's pre-recorded voice began narrating as her father discussed illegal drug trials and money laundering. The auditorium erupted. Alan Reeves shouted for someone to cut the feed. But Jack had locked the control system. Security rushed toward the stage. But Veronica kept talking. The Zegina contract I announced last month was designed to resurrect Project Helix. I didn't know that when I negotiated it. But I know now. And I cannot allow this company to profit from human suffering. More videos played. Financial records appeared. Medical reports documented people who'd been harmed. Through it all, Veronica narrated evidence of her father's crimes and her own near complicity. Alan Reeves finally made it to the stage, face purple with rage. You're destroying this company, he screamed. Everything we've built. Everything built on blood. Veronica interrupted. Everything built on lies. If the foundation is rotten, Alan, then it deserves to collapse. Security reached her. But before they could escort her off stage, Jack Morrison walked out from the wings. He crossed calmly and stood beside Veronica. The cameras captured the moment the CEO in designer suit and the janitor in worn uniform, standing together. Jack leaned toward the microphone. Truth doesn't need to be loved, he said. It just needs to be heard. The consequences came swiftly. Within 3 hours, federal investigators had opened formal inquiry into Axiom Capital. Within 12 hours, Alan Reeves and 6 other board members had been taken into custody. Within 24 hours, the company's stock had cratered. Veronica spent 2 days giving depositions. She handed over every piece of evidence, explained her ignorance and recent discovery, and accepted full responsibility. The prosecutors were surprisingly gentle. The timeline made clear she'd been manipulated. Her decision to expose the conspiracy, rather than profit from it, weighed heavily in her favor. But that didn't mean she escaped consequences. Veronica formally resigned as CEO on a gray Wednesday morning. She wore no makeup and a simple black dress. "I cannot undo the harm my father caused," she said. "I cannot bring back the people who died because of Project Helix. But I can ensure that no one else dies from Axiom's crimes. I take full responsibility for my oversight, my arrogance, and my failure to question what I was being told. I am deeply, profoundly sorry." She paused. "I am not proud to be Richard Sterling's daughter, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." The media response was mixed. Some outlets praised her courage. Others pointed out she'd been moments away from signing the contract that would have made everything worse. Veronica read every article and accepted every criticism as deserved. Meanwhile, Jack Morrison was being hailed as a whistleblower and hero. The Financial Regulatory Board formally apologized and began clearing his record. Job offers poured in. He declined everything. On a quiet evening, a reporter cornered him outside his apartment. "Mr. Morrison," she called, "you brought down a billion-dollar company. Don't you have anything to say?" Jack paused. "I'm not a hero," he said simply. "I just did what should have been done 10 years ago." 1 year later, the city had moved on. Axiom Capital had been dismantled, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to victims of Project Helix. Several executives were in prison. The pharmaceutical industry faced increased scrutiny. In a small community center, a fundraiser was taking place for an organization supporting victims of illegal medical experimentation. Jack Morrison stood near the refreshment table, watching Ella chat enthusiastically with volunteers. She'd grown 2 inches and was talking about colleges now, about studying public health. She wanted to make sure what happened with Helix never happened again. A door opened, and Veronica Sterling walked in. Jack's breath caught. He hadn't seen her in person since she'd resigned. She looked different. Younger. Despite the stress. She'd cut her hair shorter, wore minimal makeup, and had traded designer wardrobe for a simple black dress. She looked uncertain, like someone who wasn't sure she had the right to be there. Their eyes met across the crowded space. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Veronica walked toward him. "Hi," she said, voice softer than he remembered. "I wasn't sure I should come, but I wanted to see you." Jack felt something shift in his chest. "I'm glad you did." They stood in awkward silence. "Are you still cleaning offices?" Veronica asked. Jack smiled. "Yeah. Different building. But yeah, it's honest work. And the hours let me be there when Ella gets home from school." Veronica nodded. "I'm working at a nonprofit now, lobbying for stricter pharmaceutical oversight. The pay is terrible, but it feels like I'm actually doing something good for once." "That sounds like you," Jack said. Before Veronica could respond, Ella appeared, looking between them with interest. "Miss Sterling, you came." The girl's enthusiasm made Veronica smile. "I did, though you can call me Veronica. Please." Ella studied her. "You look different. Less scary." Veronica laughed. "Thank you, I think. It's a compliment." Ella assured her. Then she added, "Are you staying for dinner? Dad made his famous pasta, and there's way too much for just us." Jack shot his daughter a look, but Veronica was already nodding. "If that's okay." "You're not imposing," Jack said. After the fundraiser ended, they walked together through the cooling evening air, Ella chattering between them. Back at the apartment, they fell into easy rhythm, Jack cooking while Veronica set the table. Over pasta, they talked about everything except what had brought them together. It was ordinary and comfortable. After Ella excused herself, Jack and Veronica stood together at the kitchen sink. "Do you ever regret it?" Veronica asked quietly. Jack considered the question. Sometimes I regret that it took me 10 years. But the actual exposure? No. Some things need to burn before anything healthy can grow. Veronica was quiet. I've been in therapy, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being a Sterling or a CEO. Jack turned to face her. Who are you finding? She looked up at him, vulnerable. I don't know yet, but I think I like her better than who I was. Something passed between them. Something that felt like possibility. Jack reached out and gently touched her hand. I think I might like her too. Veronica's breath caught. Then Ella's voice called from the other room. Dad? Veronica? Can you help me with this math problem? The moment broke, but gently a shared smile, an understanding that some things were worth building slowly. They went to help Ella, sitting around the small table, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Through the window, city lights reflected off clouds, and in that modest apartment, 3 people brought together by tragedy were discovering the shape of something that looked remarkably like hope. Truth doesn't kill love, Jack thought. It creates it. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the city clean.